with us again to share with us some really cool information stats of fuel travel. The Fueligans, as they're notoriously known in the infamous world of hospitality. Oh, and speaking of extra Fueligans, Mr. Eye Candy himself, Stuart Butler.
Fuel is in the house.
This is the Fueligan Show. I don't know whether you know this, but they have taken over the world. Our show included. Hey, Miss Stephanie. Stephanie Smith with Cogwheel Marketing. But it is the Fueligan Show because they have this super cool data, because they have the super cool survey they've been doing. And with that, I would leave it over to literally just here's the show. Take the show. Just take the dang show because it's all about you guys today anyway. Go, Mellisa.
Wow, this doesn't happen very often. It's a day all about me.
Yeah.
Me.
That's not true. Every day in the office is a day about Mellisa.
Sure. Hey, Stuart, guess what Mellisa did when she came into the room?
What's that?
Hit the big red button.
Nobody said don't hit the big red button.
Well, at least it was at the beginning and not halfway through the show.
That's true. At least it didn't shut the show off. It just kind of got an interesting start to the process. Mr. Edward StOnge, what do? How are you, sir? So, Ed, you're not alone. Mellisa hit the big red button, too.
Just now?
Yeah, to start it. When she came into the room early on, like 5 minutes before the show was to start. All of a sudden, the show, I turned around, it's like the show started. I'm like, what? Huh?
That's amazing. Yeah. I love it.
You are the first to start the show, but many people have ended the show.
Yes. See, you had to be unique.
I've done it twice.
You did one thing somebody else hasn't done yet, which was false start the show. So, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're going to come in big.
That's a 5-yard penalty.
Go big or go.
Hey, Tris.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Good, good.
Happy Friday.
Well, now you have to make up for it now, Mellisa.
Oh, boy. Pressure's on.
That's
Pressure's on.
So,
heat is on.
What cool super news do you have now? The new results you guys got, 2 days ago?
Yeah, it's been a couple days. We're on episode 4 of this survey. So this is now a month and a half in after the first one was sent out. And it's a lot of good news. Good news.
No. There's no way.
I know. I'm supposed to be like every other news outlet and pretend the world is coming to an end.
Doom, death, destruction. Yes.
In fact, that's just not true. It's just not true. So first of all,
it's not true for leisure travel.
Yeah, fine. In my world, it's not true. How about that?
Right.
So in our office, we call Melissa's last name is Kavanagh, but we often call her Mellisa Caveat because almost everything she says, there's a caveat there hidden somewhere. So the caveat today is that we're really talking about leisure travel. So to set this up for folks that haven't been following the show or following what we've been doing, this is a study we send out in very large sample size. We've had over 10,000 respondents in the others. So the first 3 surveys, we sliced it down a little bit this time to try to avoid fatigue, but we still got over 5,000, so it's still one of the largest, if not the largest, sentiment study out there. But it is targeting leisure travelers, so primarily concentrated in the eastern seaboard. So it's a lot of I think top states are North, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Ohio, places like Georgia. So those are in the top 10.
Quite a bit of Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, this is a statistically significant number of Canadians. And we actually, for this 4th edition of the study, we did slice them out and take a little peek to see how different they are than U.S. travelers. And there's definitely a difference, and we would expect to see that. Canadians are way nicer than Americans, way less aggressive. So we would expect to see a difference. But yeah, I mean, with that said, I'll hand it to Mellisa to go through kind of the findings, and rather than us focusing on, the things that we already know, we'll try to focus a little bit on the slight shifts we're seeing, although there's really not that many shifts. And there was an extra question. And then just to tease you a little bit, Ed, we did listen to you. We changed a couple of the ways we asked the questions, and we added some options to a couple of the questions based on you brutalizing Mellisa last time she was on the show. So hopefully,
I thought I was being very nice.
Well, nice relative.
On the spectrum of Ed, you probably were. But spectrum of Ed is on the tougher end scale of most people's niceness.
It's a relative thing. Yeah. So, but we did. We're all always about feedback and looking to improve. It's the Fueligan way. So we definitely took some of that feedback and applied it to this version. So you want to take it away, Mellisa?
I will take it away with my favorite stat to start off with, which we've asked on every version of the survey, asking people what would persuade them to book a future vacation, basically right now. And the number of those who said that they could not be persuaded has been on a downward spiral since we started. We started it over about 40% of people who could not be persuaded, and we're down to 21% on this version of the survey. Now, based on my music major math brain, that means that at least about 80% could be persuaded to go on a trip right now. 80%, that's really good news, right?
That's got to be pretty close to what the normal amount of people who could be persuaded to take a trip right now would be.
Yeah. One of the things we kind of is unfortunate is we don't have benchmarks for some of these questions. I think one of the things we've learned from here is we're going to continue to do some form. We always do studies, but we don't really think through like what if something happens and we need benchmarks for this. So I think
how could you not have known there was going to be a global pandemic that was going to lock down the entire world, right? And that understanding baseline simple things was going to be financially important.
Yeah, I can do nothing but apologize. We were keep the court's spin at the wheel there. Clearly,
you make Bill Gates cry.
Yeah.
The survey respondents in here were people that were previously inclined to travel, right? You didn't.
Oh yeah.
So
these are folks that have taken a trip in the last 12 months. Is how we kind of maintain that database. So yeah.
Okay.
Hey Ben.
Hey buddy.
Yeah.
So, just sticking along that same question, though, we did see that flexibility just continues to be more important, that flexibility to change dates without penalty continues to grow over time. So clearly that's an important issue to people. So, I'm very curious to see how long our hoteliers are going to hold out on these flexible cancellation policies. I'd like to use my crystal ball and see how long that's going to play out.
I am noticing in the I'm still going to come back to watching the morning news feeds again, because for a while it's just, as we said, gloom and doom all the time, and they're beginning to try to have that more optimistic spin in the process. They were talking a lot about the propensity of travel, and I find it very encouraging that literally we're hearing it from you first. They're echoing that in other places, like they were talking to Kayak and so forth, as to search query interest and type of query, domestic versus international, drive versus flight, and all this other stuff. And it literally is backing up everything that you're saying. People are looking for the short to hop, the tethered travel kind of thing, 100 miles ish kind of stuff, couple hours, all that stuff that you guys have been talking about for the past 4 to 6 weeks, and it's all kind of coming through in the same way in the news now.
I feel like a lot of the cancellation rates, though, people aren't canceling like they were before. But at this, and then Marriott changed theirs for no more cancellations within 24 hours. Are you guys seeing the same on the independent side? Or do you have any stipulations at all, or is it free for all still?
I haven't changed.
Yeah, from the ones I'm looking at, what they're doing is pretty smart. They're giving a close-in, no penalty for cancellations, usually 72 or 48 hours, but then they're also offering some form of travel insurance for folks that want, up to the minute, last minute cancellation flexibility as well. So, and that seems to be working. It seems to be working. If you do and Mellisa will touch on this in a second, but if you do flexibility in conjunction with really promoting the safety side of things, you can really generate a lot of bookings. We're seeing, especially beach destinations right now, are getting tremendous booking volume, significantly higher than the same time last year. And obviously they have fewer rooms already booked. Their occupancy levels are a lot lower. They've got a lot to catch up on, but the volume is such that I think we will see people catch up very quickly. And there are some outlier markets in our hometown, Myrtle Beach. I was speaking to someone from Booking.com yesterday. Myrtle Beach opened for new reservations on May 15th. In the first weekend that it was open, hotels were at 95% occupied. This coming weekend, they're probably going to be 100% occupied, and we're projecting they'll probably be full every weekend through at least Father's Day, maybe a little dip. But people are ready to travel if you give them the flexibility. And it's not a rate thing, because a lot of folks wanted to try to slow it down because they weren't quite ready for 85, 95% occupancy, so they didn't have the staffing. And even jacking the rates and adding 3-night minimums did not stop people coming. So there's this pent-up demand that is real. And as you see from the data, 20% of people are saying they're not willing to travel right now. Well, the 80% that are, and especially as you go younger in the demographics, I mean, they're not only are they ready, but they're actually doing it. They're traveling right now.
Well, so and you're competing with less. They don't have as many options in travel as they normally would. They can't go international. So even though you may have lost international travel, some of that's going to be replaced by the fact that, you know, your domestic can't travel internationally. There's no cruise competition for the short term. You know, so there's a lot less competing right now for available short-term travel. That can be a huge benefit. And kind of mimicking or echoing what you said, I was actually speaking to a prospect yesterday that they just opened up. They just opened up a week and a half ago from being closed. They're in North Carolina on the beach. And they in the week and a half that they've opened back up and have taken reservations, have gotten such an influx that they're now only 2% behind on the year for reservations. That's insane.
It's crazy. And to your point, it's different, right? It's not necessarily the same audience that you would typically see, because folks do have a limited choice, and they are less likely to travel further. They're a lot more likely to drive 2 or 3 hours, which we'll talk about in a second. So you really need to rethink your playbook as you're switching on your advertising, which if you're primarily a leisure destination, you absolutely should have your advertising back on right now. If you don't, then you're waiting too long, because the demand is right there. And we saw the surge begin to pick up momentum right before opening the doors here in Myrtle Beach. So get your advertising back on. But man, you've got to be ready for this, and you can't just switch on the same ad campaigns from last year. You've got to really think through, okay, who should I be targeting now? Who is going to be traveling? Where am I going to get them from? Because just switching on the old campaigns is going to be wasting money at a time when you can't afford to waste money.
I can give you an example of that it just was an inspirational thing because of being in Florida right now. I never considered the stranded snowbird. You know, I took for granted the people that were in, because I live in a retirement area. You know, there's a lot of people that come down seasonally, obviously, and they extended their stay because of lack of or concern of their travel capabilities getting back up to their home towns. Plus, also, if you're going to get stranded somewhere, why not down here instead of back up there? Especially with Northeast with the densities and everything else in the hotspots. So they delayed their travel back. Now their questions are, who can I trust to travel back and stay at? I'm not going to stay at the XYZ roadside hotel anymore. Who do I want to stay with? And so I have some branded hotels that are kind of between A and C, you know, that they're kind of the intermediary places. And literally by just targeting Florida as a market for a place for them to get to in transient to northern cities like Detroit, Cincinnati, Chicago, so forth, places where people are going back to, great pickup on conversion from those, because they trust the Hilton, the IHG, the Marriott, Best Western, La Quinta a little bit, but more so the fact that they're not staying at the, I don't know what it usually is, kind of place next to the sun. I'm not going to be bad on names, but it's picking up some traffic. It's picking up good conversions where they're like, good, I'll stay there, you know, because you got the new ways of doing things, the cleaning policies and so forth that are more enforced by the brands than some other brands. So,
so the only thing I picked up from what you said there, Lauren, is that you live in a retirement area, and I didn't think you were retired.
Well, mentally, I'm out to lunch all day, but.
Okay.
You know, you can't say you've been drinking all day if you don't start in the morning, and you got to make sure you make some for lunches and breaks and you know, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, margarita time.
That's my time schedule.
And here's one thing, because I think it's important that you touched on it. Right now, because the biggest motivator is not price. We're seeing that people are willing to spend a little bit more for the reassurance and the trust in the feeling of safety. So, I think some folks weren't quite ready in the markets that are coming back and had dropped their rate, and they left a lot of opportunity for revenue on the table. So I really would urge everyone to be really cautious in be managing rates in real time, because we saw something that in the 20 years I've been in this industry I've never seen before. We went from 40% occupied on a Friday morning to 95% occupied that night and 100% occupied this Saturday. So within a 24-hour period, 2 days went from 40% to 100% occupied, which is such a tidal wave of demand that if you were there sleeping at the wheel and you had rates and you were only looking at them every day or every couple of days, you lost your shirt. And now we've got folks, because they were real time looking at their rates and their demand, were able to yield up to a point where they were getting July 4th rates for last weekend. A weekend in May when apparently no one's traveling, they were getting July 4th rates and filling up with restrictions.
Can you imagine what the Keys are going to be like June 1st when they open up? Because the normal life of the Florida Keys was 48% of the people were walk-ins every day of the week. I mean, just you could be looking at half occupancy by the end of the night. You're sold out because walk-ins were so prominent, because people have this mental thought of there must be an infinite amount of inventory in the Keys because that's what they do. And so you would always have people who just fill up half your hotel by walking in that night. You can imagine it literally will be like lights on, boom, June 1st, 100% occupancy. Everybody's going to come back.
The walk-ins are still are happening a lot more now than they were before. I think because people they feel like they have the control, so they're more comfortable doing that where they may not have been before. But I don't have that. I guess the other side of things is, as much as I appreciate the positivity in Myrtle Beach, and I've seen it in Hilton Head and Nags Head as well, it's the problem being the rest of the hotels that weren't leisure focused before that are trying to be leisure-esque now and trying to switch their whole, trying to shift their whole strategy, and they don't have the amenities to support it right now. So it's hard, turning on a switch to a different audience that you didn't really cater to before.
Right. Yep. Very, very true. But one thing I did notice out of the news conversation today, they were talking about that destination resort travel is the third highest interest category, according to what Kayak was saying, in comparison to what people's choices of travel interests were. Yeah,
I got to see some. I probably shouldn't say, but I will. I'll beg forgiveness. But I saw the top 10 demand destinations from Booking.com yesterday, and it was almost all beach destinations, folks. And this is in the country and in the world. Myrtle Beach, literally right now, is number 2 in the world in terms of booking pace over the last 7 days.
Wow.
Behind Dubai, right? So Dubai's the only place that's booking faster than Myrtle Beach right now. Others in the top 10 were like Panama City Beach, Ocean City, Maryland. So it really is those beach destinations. Miami Beach was on there. It's drive destination, beach destinations are where it's at. If you are in one of those situations, if you have a property in a beach destination, or I would argue too, a mountain resort or something that's more outdoors.
Yeah, Denver's got a lot of pace.
You need to be back top 10 for Expedia.
Yeah.
You need to be advertising like heck. You need to be getting your stuff back quickly, and you need to be ready for a tidal wave like you've never seen before, because it's coming.
Them's what we call positive problems.
Yeah, I mean, literally. So that it's you joke about that, right? But so we have folks that cannot get staff back, right? So if you go from what you're projecting is 40% occupied, and you go in 24, 48 hours to 100% occupied, and you've only got 50% of your staff, and the other 50% are telling you, I'm not coming back because I'm making more money on unemployment, what do? So we literally have the marketing folks for our clients are in their cleaning rooms. The GMs are the cleaning rooms. Everyone's cleaning rooms. And we had a couple of property groups this weekend that decided at 80% occupied, they were going to stop taking reservations, even though they could have commanded a July 4th rate, because they didn't feel like they could handle the capacity with their current staffing levels, because they weren't prepared for it. So there's some real challenges coming from this.
Well, that falls straight back again to what we were talking about with the 80% of people who could be persuaded to travel again. One of the big things that was in your word cloud there is safety. And if you've got a GM and a marketer cleaning your room, I mean, with the greatest respect to GMs, I am a marketer, and I know that I'm probably not going to be as good as a professional at cleaning a room, let alone making a bed.
We can tell.
Thanks, buddy.
It's that damn biofilm every time.
It's a biofilm. It is.
It's the biofilm.
My snake seems happy though. There you go.
Weirdly inappropriate thing to say.
It's in the shop. Come on.
Sure.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah. Cheers.
So, Stuart, this tidal wave that you say is coming back, do you think it's going to be an inverted W or an N style of tidal wave? Do you think that everyone should be unfurling staff straight away, or is it a sort of eye of the storm?
I mean, I think every situation is different, right? Every destination, every property type, every level, category is going to be slightly different. But I think you've got to expect the unexpected. I think that's what we've learned over the last week.
Yeah, keep your eyes open. Because think about something Stuart said about their properties that were kind of panicking about this. They jacked up their rate to try and slow it down, and it didn't. So that's actually probably the best thing that could have happened to those properties, because it forced them to experiment with pricing.
Yep.
And so, I think if you walk away, like Stuart said, with anything from this news, is you need to be on your toes. You need to be testing because you don't know how people are behaving right now, because we've never done this before.
Yeah, you got to take the lesson that Yoda taught us, which is you've got to unlearn what you've learned, because every rule of engagement that we previously knew in that old reality doesn't necessarily apply anymore. So you've got to be looking at your data in real time, adjusting and experimenting. And I mean, this could be one of the outcome of this could be really positive, because we may be a lot more sophisticated as hoteliers and marketers on the flip side of this.
I'm going to quote Tim. I'm going to quote Lauren Gray, misquoting Tim Peter, who was actually quoting Bill Gates, which is, let's not overestimate the near-term change that's going to happen. I don't think it'll make us more sophisticated. It may make singular people decide to become more sophisticated, but as an industry, this isn't going to be the thing. Maybe 10 years from now.
I'm intrigued to know what will happen to the UK market as well, from what you were saying there, Ed, about the lack of international travel. As Stuart and Ben will attest, us Brits, if we're going to go on vacation, we're not typically going to go in the UK, because let's be honest, there's no sun here ever. So we're going for, if we're wanting a beach, exactly, yeah. If we're wanting a beach, it isn't going to be in our country. Now that's gone. Certainly for the near future, probably for this summer, I would imagine. Because even if the likes of Spain, Greece, Italy, or whoever do open up the doors, and there isn't a 14-day self-isolation period, I don't know how confident travellers are going to be to go to another country. Maybe a drive market. It can be similar sentiment here. So we might have the biggest boom in the UK market, the UK hotel market, that we've seen in a long while, even if it's only for a very short period of time over these couple of months. If the sentiment is happening over in the US there, and we follow suit, but we are a little bit behind because we're still in lockdown.
So you can look at some of that, Tris. I've been using, on top of the amazing data point that is the fuel sentiment study, I've also been using a sentiment study from Global Web Index that is a bit more of a global sampling study. It's 17 countries, just over 15,500 respondents. And that does some breakdowns in consumer sentiment by its concentrations, and UK is one of them. So that is definitely worth going and looking at. To see, and you can see there's some definite parallels between what Fuel is seeing with their base versus what other parts of the world are thinking. And actually, it also mirrors something that Stuart had talked about on the last program, which is this idea of a sliding bell curve. So Stuart was kind enough, because I was speaking with HSMAIs in Canada, to filter for me the fuel responses by the Canadian people who responded. And if you look, their bell curve is just a little bit further out than ours, than how US travelers are talking. But it wasn't substantially further out. It was maybe a 2-month lag bell curve, but it was the same bell curve. It was the same exact amount of demand, happening just further out. So, there is definitely something to be said about the waves that are going to come in as different groups of people hit that point where they're either feeling safe and going to do it because of that, or they're just so burnt out on this whole thing that they're throwing some of their issues with safety out the window.
Well, to your point, Tristan, I think a lot of Stuart's people that were responding were a lot on the East Coast, and I would wonder if the same sentiment applies to the West Coast. I don't have data to support it, but I do feel the West Coast has been operating just a little bit differently in terms of the pandemic versus the East Coast, especially the Southeast.
Mm-hmm.
So,
sure. Yeah.
I don't know if the survey necessarily speaks to the whole United States either.
I imagine you're probably right there, especially if we're seeing Myrtle Beach at number 2, in the fastest rising charts. You'd expect to see other places in there as well as it changes. But I think, again, to both Stephanie and Ed's point there, you can see this wave effect, because I think I was reading in the news recently that Brazil seems to be on the rise in terms of COVID-19 cases. So it's almost that they're at the start of their problems.
They surpassed the United States in the sense of cases being, they're the next major country hotspot.
Yeah, there's a question whether South America is going to be that next pandemic hotspot, whereas you've got like China's, they've come out of it by the sounds of it. If you listen to all of the news that's happened there, and then obviously Italy as well, they've been a couple of weeks ahead. Then the US has been slightly different. The UK, it seems to be hopping around a little bit. Then it's going to be interesting to see whether there's any learnings that we can take for this. I'd be really interested to know specific information from China. Because I know they're up at around, or when I checked last week, they were around 50, 55, 60% occupancy levels just in general. But I haven't seen anything come out where there's been this massive influx of.
Yeah. But I think there's a big cultural difference, right? Mm. I think the U.S. is going to be more aggressive just by the nature of the community that is here, and I think probably the East Coast, to Stephanie's point, is probably going to be earlier adopters than the West Coast. I think that would be natural when we look at political leanings and ideologies and things like that. Asia, we were trying to model what we expected to happen based a lot on what was going on in Asia, and it just, the models don't hold up at all. The slight 5-10% per week recovery on occupancy is not what we're seeing in certain regions, certain types of property. So I think, some of this data, although it's useful as a kind of guiding light, we've all got to really take a look at our unique situation, because what I'm saying about Myrtle Beach or Panama City Beach is not going to be the same for New York City, So you've really got to prepare, and to Ed's point, you've got to be on it and looking all the time and adjusting, and it's but people are ready to travel. That's the good news.
Getting back to Melissa's information about it, you looked at the cloud that you had on yours, and safety is the biggest term and word in the middle of it. And I've just from a firsthand how to adapt this to what your messaging is on all of our social platforms for the hotels. We talk about and do short little videos, because Ed made a comment about this before a couple of weeks back. I've echoed that before, where our level of caliber of videography has been broadened as to what we accept as being okay video. if they're doing live night shows at home by Jimmy Fallon, we have a different sense of what is acceptable videography at this point. And having a GM or DOS or front desk, whoever it is, simply walk through. It's been one of the most successful videos we did for the one hotel, was simply walk through on the cleaning procedures of what walking in. From now on, here's the sneeze screen between you and the front desk agent. This is how we handle breakfast. It's the box you come down for. You order and you pick it up. This is what we do for cleaning in the rooms. We have a housekeeper showing the cleanliness of the rooms and cleaning the room to show what we're doing in the room. And this little minute and a half video, it's not really long, but we have got more responses about it and asking further up questions and or confirmations that they're happy they're staying with us. I mean, this is a hotel that's in Vancouver that's at 87% occupancy right now, and where their comp set is still closed. They can't get enough business to even open the door. So it has a resonance to these people that when you say that big safety, that word cloud that says safety, if you start answering that main concern, people are appreciating that information over rate or whatever. They're happy to know that you're doing something like that. And that's for an independent hotel.
And that being said, I mean, let's follow what other videos you could do. Scared is a big one. So, maybe we could do some horror films. Some horror films inside the,
Well, the risk
that's
is
a
in
negative
there
of the positive. That's an affirmation of the affirmative. How's that?
But also relaxation.
My favorite is the COVID relaxation.
Yeah, but that's going into Maslow. What Robert said, Maslow's
Just
hierarchy.
messing around, guys.
Be safe first. Safety first.
So this word cloud's been interesting. I'd like Mellisa to kind of talk through what we've seen over time, because it to me is one of the biggest indicators of the shift in the psyche than any of the other questions we have. So you want to kind of talk us through that, Mellisa?
I will, but I'm going to backtrack for 1 second and just talk about safety for a minute, because that was one of the questions we asked, is what people want to hear from hotels on these topics. And safety is number one. They want to know what the property is doing to protect their guests. Over 60% want to know this information, and that has grown on every consecutive survey. We started at 53%, went up to 58%. We're now at 61% of people that want to hear about what the property is doing to protect guests. And that
what's
is
interesting,
it's more popular than packages and specials.
Right, which is what's really interesting is if you look back 6 weeks ago when we started this, that wasn't the case. Pricing was higher than safety. So, but people weren't ready to travel, right? So this is an indicator of their state of mind has shifted. At the time, they weren't really thinking, I'm going to travel next week or next month. They were thinking sometime in the future, I'm going to travel, and price is the most important thing when I travel. That's the normal characteristic. But as this thing's unfolded, and as now they're getting closer to, we're down to brass tacks of, all right, I'm going to travel. What do I need to think about? Safety has trumped price. And that's a really important insight, I think, in terms of your strategy, your marketing strategy, and your price point. Yeah, your messaging, your pricing, you need to keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. So keep going, Mellisa. Talk about the other
All right, so
stuff.
Talking about the word cloud. So yes, safety is, and has been since our first survey, has been up front and center, no doubt. Scary has been second, and a very big word as well. Scary is starting to shrink in small quantities. But last survey, we saw freedom pop in there. This time we've got all kinds of relaxing going on. Relaxation, relaxing. We have excited, we have fun. And then I think my favorite word might be needed. Like, people are itching to get the heck out of their houses at this point. And by the fact that only 20% are saying they could not be convinced to travel, I think that this goes hand in hand with that.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how many of those, if you were asked, would want to go with their family or would want to go alone.
Very good question.
What is the unemployment rate in England right now for you guys? What are you running at?
Climbing. I think it's risen from 800, 600,000 to over 1 million. It's just up. I was reading an article this morning about just how much we'd borrowed last month. And they're already talking about tax hikes, and we're not even out of COVID yet, and everyone's suddenly patting their pockets and going, hold on, has anyone thought how we're going to pay for this yet?
Oh, wait, no. As long as all the
tomorrow use problem.
As long as all the countries believe that everybody else's money's still backed up and valuable, they'll just keep printing it like they're doing anyway. So, but no, we're up to about 20. They just hit the threshold. We're up at 1 out of 4 in the U.S. is unemployed at this point.
Wow.
So there is that financial consideration of the propensity to travel as well. And I think, Stuart, you made it very abundantly clear in the Mellisa. I'll point to Mellisa rather than Stuart, that the lower income people have that higher willingness or desire to just spend the money that's necessary for them to travel, because they look at the money that they're getting from unemployment or whatever as a bit of a windfall. I love that stat that you put out of that. You've been keeping track of that pretty consistently.
Yeah. So on this round of the survey, we didn't see this last round, but on this round, and that I think indicates to me that yes, unemployment is higher, but a higher percentage of people on the lower income scale were willing to spend their stimulus money on a vacation than the higher income brackets.
I think some of my GMs did vouch for that. Some of my GMs have been complaining about it's not the clientele that they normally get at the hotel.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. When we look at the folks that are getting bookings, it tends to be a younger crowd in a lower income level crowd that are coming for sure. Those are the
feel like I said that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like a couple of weeks ago, I said, hey, we're going to see a traveler we don't normally see at first because they have more money in their pocket than they've had at any point in their life, and they're going to take their once-in-a-lifetime trip. And that's exactly what's happening. This is not a traveler you normally see in mass.
Right. Well, there's a lot of compelling factors for that, though. They're also the ones that were taken. Their life was most uprooted. The college graduates that didn't get to graduate traditionally. The young people that went to start their life that didn't start traditionally. They're owed. They're due. They got stuck. And no matter what hybrid ways we try to address, congratulations anyway, it's not the same. And they lost their summer vacation. They lost their spring break. They lost all the things that were traditional to their life cycle at that time. And they want to get the heck out of Dodge and enjoy what they didn't get to do before. And they're going to either get money, find money, or have money from being unemployed. And also, they're the ones that, when you look at the what is the term for the essential worker? Most of the essential workforce was the lower income force. Not a lot of essential force was the higher income force. Those were the ones who were furloughed mostly. And I don't really have a strong stat to say that I can point to that, but based just on metrics of who I talk to versus what they're doing, I got one renter of a rental house that is a hydraulic worker, and he's been up to above his head in work requirement. And then I got somebody else that's a high-end executive that got furloughed as soon as the company got a whiff that they were going to lose money. So, these people have been working. They've been stressed out. They want to get away. So there's probably a lot of mitigating factors to that age categorization that's going to drive them to say, as soon as they get the break, they want the break. They want to go take advantage of the break while they still can't have the money to do so.
Yeah, so. And I will say, too, that there are some consequences to that, right? And we've seen that in the markets where we've seen this tidal wave hit, because it tends to be this younger crowd. In a lot of them are, like you said, college kids or even high school graduates that feel like their high school final year was cheated from them. There's some behavioral challenges, and especially when they're congregating en masse. Like, very few people were following social distancing. Very few were wearing face masks. There was a lot of kind of ad hoc congregations in abandoned parking lots and closed businesses. So if there's a restaurant in your town and it isn't currently open, but it has a parking lot, there were groups of young folks gravitating to those areas and having a good time. And that comes with some consequences. And in some cases that escalated to something a little more serious, and law enforcement were involved. But I would say if you're in those situations where you may get this tidal wave coming, make sure you've got appropriate security to deal with any kind of incidents. Make sure that you're communicating with local law enforcement in your city to make sure that they're prepared for this potential issue. Because candidly, some of the destinations we work with, they weren't ready, and they got caught with their pants down in law enforcement and other typical groups that are going to help keep things fun and where they should be, weren't ready for a jump from 40% to 100% occupancy in 24 hours.
And fortunately for those destinations where that happened, there were so many of them that the national news didn't pick up any of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it
so
wasn't isolated to one destination. There was a pattern of this in a lot of areas. So.
Yeah,
and so be especially more difficult given the fact that your hotel as well is potentially going to be understaffed, and your GM is doing 1,000,001 jobs, as is everybody else. It's just going to be.
Darlene, you're going to unfurlough as your security guard.
Yeah. Darlene asked, based on a previous thing we're talking about, to your current point, any insights into demand for limited service properties versus full or luxury hotels?
I think the data supports a lot of the extended stay, at least, have done a fair amount better. And at least from what I see, the limited service are going to be able to bounce back quicker. And we're talking about non-beach, non-leisure destinations.
Yeah, that is the category that we've seen really do well. Well, not well, but relatively well over the last 6 weeks has been extended stay. They seem to be holding their own in terms of the demand. The types of folks that are going to use those for extended periods as almost as a permanent, semi-permanent home have needed it. So even though things like construction in certain areas, which drives some of that, and business travel isn't there, there's the residential side of extended stay that's done okay. And I think we will see, some of those lower end categories come back fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and also because a lot of the full service hotels, at least in downtown city markets, are closed right now. Most of those big box hotels, there's the inventory isn't in those downtown markets right now.
Well, and I wonder, I was talking about this with some others this week, and I wonder what is going to happen with these, super big box convention hotels in markets where there's 3 or 4 of them near each other. Are they all going to open? Because in most cases, those types of hotels are owned by, REITs or hedge funds or things like that. The types of businesses that, at least some of them are going to make the decision to lose less money by not opening it, because, you think about downtown Atlanta, where you have 4 big box, giant behemoth hotels that really only exist for the purpose of housing the people coming to the convention center and, that type of travel. How are you going to open all 4? You really can't. Are some of these REITs and hedge funds going to just not open to cut how much they lose? Because the market, you can't fill that much inventory with just leisure in a market like Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Or Seattle.
Yeah. But going back to limited service or extended stay ones, there was also the whole market of the stranded traveler. There was a lot of places that required 14-day quarantines and so forth, and we took full advantage of it in the cities we had hotels, and that allowed us to have that, where being a full suite or having the kitchen facilities of a long-term stay, or at least some facility towards it, really helped them to self-quarantine for the requirements that they had. So, like I said, those were little aspects of marketing that just didn't exist 4 months ago.
Richard put a comment in about state and federal unemployment potentially getting extended through the year. Yes, that is a topic right now, but alongside that is actually a qualifier is trying to be attached to that if your employer offers you your job back, that instantly invalidates your ability. Even if you don't want to go back, you will lose the unemployment. Mm-hmm. What they're trying to work on.
Mm-hmm. That has to happen for this to work. Otherwise, there's not an incentive for these folks to go back to work.
Right.
So, that happens.
Are there caveats to, I don't know if this is true or not, but aren't there caveats, like if you're bringing somebody back at a lower, or offer them a lower position or reduced pay, that it doesn't apply? It has to be same job, same pay?
Yes. That's what they're trying to pass. This law doesn't exist right now. It's being kind of put together to handle this. But yes, if you're offering, what they're trying to work on as part of extending the federal unemployment through the year, they're trying to work on qualifications for that. If you are offered the job you had at the pay you had it, and you decline, then you lose the federal unemployment portion.
Is there I wonder if there'd be a time limit on that as well, because you've got government loans and grants coming back that may be enough to initially get people back, but in the hope that business will pick up. What happens if business doesn't pick up?
Well, that would be a new event. That would be you getting laid off again. So
really?
Yeah, that's a secondary event. So
because they're even talking about extending the benefit ability for the PPP to be spent longer than what the original duration of 2 months was, simply because it was so late that some people got it. Some businesses got it that they can't effectively actually spend it in the qualified time and would end up making it as a loan. So they're saying that they're going to look at extending the time period to potentially allow you to continue payroll. Which because right now you have a lot of ghost workers because everyone was brought back because they could be paid for a very short period of time, but there's no durability to how long they would stay afterwards.
Yeah. Well, and the hope is that they're going to watch that, and if this continues to where these businesses are suffering, is another round of PPP for businesses who've already taken part, because they haven't exhausted this last round of PPP, which means
during the first PPP,
so many people getting money back.
Well, the first PPP. Was not handled well.
What do you mean? Big companies making tons of millions? What the heck? What are you talking about?
It wasn't handled well. But even that, you have to ask, if the government is restricting a business, regardless of what type of business it is, regardless of how profitable or who owns it, if the government is restricting that business from being able to operate, shouldn't the government be responsible for keeping that business together? I mean, this is one of those challenges. Like, I look at what happened with Steak, what is it, Shake Shack and Ashford and all of these large entities that were owned by rich people. Their businesses were completely devastated by this. Should they have gotten it when they got it? No, I think you should have taken care of the small business first, but then opened up, because if you want the economy working correctly on the other side of this, you need all the businesses healthy. Regardless of if the business is owned by a rich person or a not rich person, you will feel it if that business disappears from the economy. If all of a sudden, Universal Studios just can't continue to operate, Orlando would feel the loss of that employer. That would economically damage Orlando for years. So at some point, the government is going to have to look at, if they're continuing to restrict the ability of business to operate, they will have to make that business whole. And trust me, if they don't, these big businesses are going to sue the government.
It's true.
And the government, let's not joke about what happened here. The government's picked the winners and losers in business here. Picking specific businesses and labeling them as essential when you could argue that they're no more essential than many other businesses, is definitely the narrative. If I was, going to sue the government for their behavior in this, that would be the narrative, is, each of these states personally picked their winners and losers. And in each state, you can pick a specific business type that you absolutely know the only reason that business type was allowed was because of some political relationship. There was no reason to have that business open if the true reason was only essential businesses. So there are some challenges here. And let's not kid, everything the government's doing from a bailout perspective is because if they don't, you will have governments overthrown. This is the type of scale and threshold that if the governments don't do the right thing, these governments as we know them will come to an end, because the people will push back against this.
I think in England, we're terribly too stiff upper lip to do that. That would be so just no. Indeed,
it's not proper, Ed.
It would not be proper.
Well, yes. Well, and you guys know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that.
Too soon, Ed.
Too soon.
Are we back again to the American government being overthrown? Everyone's coming back in again. Are we there? Is that what it is?
I would make the joke that
the fight Tesla's gotten into with California. Tesla's not wrong. And so at what point, how many businesses need to do like what Tesla has threatened to do to where a state is permanently financially damaged by what happens from it? Because I'm not talking about the federal government. I'm talking about the state government.
Yeah, and in some cases, city-level governments are making restrictions beyond the state level, which I've heard rumblings of lawsuits at the city level too.
Yep.
So it's all levels of government for sure.
Yeah, so here in Naples, Florida, down south of us in Naples, Florida, Naples opened up its beaches and immediately closed it the same day, that evening, because everybody from Miami, being the hotspot it was, traveled over and buried the beaches over here because they had to get out of town. So then, and this is the part that concerns me, anybody with a New York license plate couldn't park. So it was one of these, well, wait a minute, now it haunts itself as, well, I don't drive with the right car, so I can't stay. I'm not from the right place, I can't come there.
It's a slippery slope to discrimination, right?
It's a real slippery slope to start saying, you're not welcome because you don't live here. They still enforce the fact that you had to show your driver's license to park in public parking. Public parking, you had to show that you were a resident. And that bothers me because it's like, it's a public place, not public just to the people that are paying the localized taxes. It's public for everybody that it should be able to come over to it. Granted, if you can't control the crowds or the crowds create risk, then you have the authority to close the place down.
But I mean, I'll give you another angle on that. And this is, the unprecedented, can we bingo card? I used it.
Oh, that's a tough one.
The unprecedented time we're in, you really have to question the handling of the initial lockdown of New York, because they didn't really lock it down. They allowed so many New Yorkers to leave. And if you look at the flight routes of all those flights going out and then draw a radius, you will see those are the hotspots of every state for a COVID breakout. So they didn't actually lock it down. They just kind of did like, hey, don't be near each other. And that was incorrect. Florida has half of its cases are originating from infection that came from New York.
Well, the interesting thing that's going to come from this is the potential second wave. Because if you listen to the top official from the World Health Organization in Europe, he's saying that as we get into winter and we have other infectious diseases come out, your cold and flu season, that we could see a resurgence. Or he believes there's going to be a very strong resurgence in COVID-19 cases. I mean, he's talking about Europe here, but this is a global pandemic. So it's going to be very interesting to see if we do see a resurgence in this, and touch wood, I pray that we don't. But I wonder how quickly people will be to lockdown. I wonder if it'll go the other way now with the criticism. I wonder if they'll be too fast to close things down and too fast to lock things down for fear of retribution, of making the same mistake twice.
Go ahead.
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't think you'll see the United States do a federal level effort ever again. I think instead you're going to see them go kind of the route of what I'm, saying we should have done, because I am the ultimate Monday morning quarterback. If you have an outbreak, you need to lock down that area. People don't come in or go out. Had we done that, you wouldn't have had most of the states that had to close. You wouldn't have had them closing because you would have contained the spread. And so the problem is one, I'm pretty sure it's illegal for us to do that. It's against our Constitution, which is going to be interesting to see how do you handle that, because that's actually the most sensible way to handle this is when an outbreak happens in an area, draw a circle around the area and no one comes out of that area for a period of time, and you will get far less geographical spread. Our government doesn't allow for that.
No.
But I apologize for this watching us on LinkedIn. I did not pop my little chatting over. There's this whole string of conversation I'm missing. But Tamara, she's in the Michigan Properties Memorial Day weekend is their big kickoff, and that it's really weird not to have that. Also, sense of security is what people is most into. So echoing what we had already talked about. Alan, what employer branding, marketing for future employees? Okay, what about employer branding, marketing to future employees, including college grads? What would be the compelling marketing message to attract candidates when more and more jobs will continue to evolve online? which will attract the younger generation in particular? That's one question that Alan had.
Yeah, and I think, we're obviously going to be in this super competitive market for talent. Not only it's really ironic, right? Because we're in this situation where there's so many people unemployed at certain aspects of hospitality, and yet there's also such a need in other parts. But we don't forget, we were in a shortage of employees even before this happened in the hospitality industry. And now we're probably going to get a lot fewer, especially seasonal workers, foreign workers, stuff like that. So there's going to be challenges. I think for me, the biggest thing is, one, it has to be a strategy. You have to have a strategy to make sure that you are more attractive as an employer than other people. So having effort, putting focus on that is important. But I think the one question I would ask as a candidate right now is, what did you do during COVID? How did you treat your employees during this situation?
Good question.
For the businesses that just straight away furloughed everyone and let them go, I think it's going to be hard to make an argument that they're a good employer. For the ones that really been.
That being said, though, some of them didn't have a choice, and some of them still did right by their employees. I saw multiple hotels lighting up their kitchens, feeding their furloughed workers. So,
that's exactly what I mean, right? How did you treat them? I mean, circumstances, what were they? Why did you make the decisions? I mean, as an employee, that would be really important to me. And I would put your current employees at the forefront of that marketing campaign, not coming from a corporate voice, but coming from the people that look and act and behave the same way as the people you want to attract. Have them be your marketing message.
Especially, by the way, I mean, I've seen this very elitist attitude come out during this, where people are saying, if you were furloughed and you didn't continue your education and you didn't do this, I'm going to ask you that when I interview you. Well, you better hope if you ask that question, you weren't a crappy actor to your employees during that time. Because listen, I know even in our space,
Hi guys, gotta go.
Oh, see you guys.
Sorry to interrupt. We're off. We've got a webinar with a HOA. So
good luck. You need to be cautious as an employer. If you're the one asking that question of how did you improve yourself while you were furloughed or laid off, you better make sure you're not in a glass house and you didn't just cut. And listen, it's not just the hotels that, because the hotels had to do it. I mean, there were some vendors in our space that did some really crappy stuff. I know multiple people who got notice of being laid off via email. And I'm sorry.
Or group videos.
Yeah, exactly.
Whole departments on the same video. Yeah, and I think, looking at the vendor space, if someone's coming into hospitality, not only what did the vendors do to their employees, but how did they treat their customers, their partners too,
right?
Because there's horror stories about that too. So I think asking the questions, it's stressful situations, extreme situations like this, how you behave really says a lot about who you are, what your character is, and what your intentions are in the future. And I think if I was looking at an employer, I'd want to know how they treated their employees, but also what did they do to prepare for the next phase? How are they thinking medium and long term to come out on the other end?
And that's going to be interesting.
With an advantage, right?
If you're a business that is going to be susceptible to potentially having to furlough workers, if this is going to continue, like if we think this is going to be a once or twice a year thing, one of the things, I'm interested to see if it comes up is this idea of a furloughed worker fund comes out, like where employees can put in 1% of their pay and the employer will match that 1% to create a fund if there's a major economic blowout. Because one of the problems is how many of these employers were responsible and had insurance policies for this and haven't seen a dime from their insurance company because their insurance company is trying to say, oh no, this doesn't count. Yeah. And so these employers aren't going to see that money potentially for, 10 years. So, and that happened quite a bit. I mean, that's rampant. Most insurance companies have tried to back out of their business interruption policies.
One of my clients is chasing his insurance company down literally for that fact that the insurance company trying to walk away saying that our coverage isn't specific to this issue. We're not. This is not a condition of what we cover for insurance. And they're pointing out that yes, it is indeed the case. There's a lot of restaurateurs. He's a restaurateur. A lot of restaurateurs are gathering and trying to do class action that says, yeah, it is. This is exactly what we're talking about. Your insurance should have been covered for. Hey, Lily.
Hi, Lily.
We're on topic, Lily. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted.
And Steph, so they're keeping us in track.
I was just checking in on you, but if I'm not needed, then I'm just going to.
No, always wanted to have you. No, we don't need to try.
At this moment in time, we're on track, but give us 30 seconds, we'll be way off.
Right off the rails.
I'd like to point out that we now have a very nice, even representation of men
we're balanced out in
on
yours.
this board.
Speaking of, Darlene did say, and Stephanie agreed, of course, obviously, feedback from CIO Magazine suggests that a good job description should be a bit of marketing, reality of the role, and necessary skills and competencies to get the job done. Reference to company culture should be included. Job descriptions need to be changed in travel. Google, Amazon, all take a more marketing approach to recruiting, which, I mean, it kind of goes back, and Lily, that you're here because we speak of convergence all the time. This is a blending of skill sets, that you're not just walking in with a siloed, I do this thing, I only do this thing, and this is the thing I do, but rather I can do these things and I know how all the other things interact with it as well. So it does broaden the perspective of your capabilities by knowing the functionality. So, I think that blending is going to be a part.
Yeah.
And I think, too,
go ahead, Lily. You're brand new to the show today.
I was just going to say that it really also requires, when they talk about marketing, I view that as sort of like an inspiration point, right? Like, not to the point where it feels really hokey, but how do I feel like I'm going to contribute something? Because especially as the majority of workforce is still millennial right now, that's out there and kind of seeking these types of jobs, they really have a need to have a purpose. So it's great to tie the job description back to how this is going to positively impact the company and how it's going to positively impact your career and what they're going to do to make sure that this is a launching pad for the next step in your career. That's something that we've always done. Like, where do you want to eventually be and how can we help you get there? We don't shy away from the fact that realistically, people are not going to work with us for the rest of their lives. But we actually have way lower turnover when we focus on where they want to go after this company than we do if we just focus on please stay, don't go anywhere.
Or you could take Stuart's route and just lay out a series of beers and time how quickly they can chug them.
See, now, somehow me coming onto the show threw us off topic, and I'm not sure how that happened.
No, I think Melissa can attest to this. Isn't it you're supposed to beat Stuart at drinking the beer? Like, it's a race that if you can beat him drinking the beer, you get the gig. But if you can't beat him drinking the beer...
Stuart is way too competitive, and he holds grudges when he loses, so no.
That's true.
I think there's two scenarios going on, because I think you guys are talking about, yes, there's going to be a lot of there's different levels of employees that are out of work right now, and maybe I'm only speaking from experience because my husband his job has been eliminated, and he hasn't had an interview for like a real job in like 10 years, so it's a whole new world for him. And as many jobs as he's applied for, like most of them he gets like absolutely zero response, not even a like thanks, have a nice day. It's mostly like just radio silence. So I think there's some ownership on both sides that
Well, and we all know part of the issue is depending on where your rank and career is, certain jobs, even though they get listed, that's not the way that job is going to get awarded. And I actually had to help my sister through this after she spent way too long as a senior person at Hewlett Packard. When she wanted to start looking for a job, she foolishly was applying for jobs of that level. And I pointed out to her, that's HR. You're not going to, above a certain level, HR is not going to end up finding the candidate. It's going to be someone who knows someone. It's about networking at a certain point. That's how you're going to get your job. And I'll tell you what, like she took that to heart, networked like crazy. Her last 3 jobs, all were unlisted jobs that did not hit the market, did not hit HR. And it was someone she knew who basically created the job opportunity for her. I mean, and that is the challenge. Like, I have a list of people for any position that we may open moving forward, because they've personally reached out to me, and yes, they're great people. And so I don't need to go look. So above a certain point, HR is not going to be the ones that source a senior position. It just rarely happens that way.
And I get it. But as somebody, my husband, who has dedicated his entire career to a specific brand and who didn't see this coming, it's heartbreaking. Sucks.
Yeah.
Well, because in the world of, it's not any fault of it at all. It's not like you can go and say this. The circumstance created itself, and you're sitting going, you did nothing wrong, and yet you find yourself on the bad side of that topic. It is, and that's the stress level of all this for a lot of people and that's where I think we're going to lose a lot of people from the industry that were really good in the industry. Is that they're going to say, this is too unstable for me to continue on. Even if I went back to what I was doing before, what's to say this can't happen again? And because as an industry, we're probably one of the hardest hits, if not the hardest hit, when it came to the impact of this. How stable is it? I mean, I know a lot of bartenders that are now going to be insurance salesmen. Why? Because it's stable. It's not what they prefer to do. It's what they know they can do more consistently without having to have the trouble of thinking that next day they can't walk into a job. So.
Has your husband tried applying for an internship at Cogwheel?
I think the interview process would be pretty
steep. Not make it on the payroll here. But I mean, the good thing is that hospitality skills are very transferable, in terms of leading and generating teams and training and, having a very owner and people first focus. I mean, I think a lot of those skills are transferable, but
yeah, Darlene points out that superlatives and job descriptions are so last century, out of the box and so forth. There is going to be a reconstruct as to what we consider definitions of skills. What we say is usable in how the world moves forward kind of process to this. And again, to Ed's point that I always misquote all the time, we overestimate the first 2 years based on quoting Tim Bost and quoting Bill Gates. There is going to be this. Where does everybody land? Where does your husband land? Does he go and just find a bigger company that he can step back into and up to? Is he change his profile as to what he wants to do? If the company wants him back, should they be able to be in the process of doing so? Does he want to go back? I mean, I'm talking to some people that I thought would never, ever consider leaving the hospitality industry, and they're considering it. Yeah. And these are well-established, well-known, excellent, talented people that they lost their heart right now. It's the motivation of what made it enjoyable isn't there right now for them. So yeah, there's going to be quite a change as to who does what and who actually comes back. And to what you're talking about, Mellisa, earlier on about the business returning, who actually comes back to take care of the business? If you can't bring the skill sets back.
And it's really interesting too, because I think, obviously I think in terms of revenue management a lot, and there are some really brilliant revenue managers out of work right now because of all the closures and things like that. So there's sort of this, we went from not enough talented revenue managers to meet the demand to sort of this glut of talented revenue managers. But I'm really curious to know how people are going to restructure. Are they now going to permanently put multiple properties under one person when they didn't previously? I've seen several companies suddenly decide that that's okay to do now, even though they were really against it in the past. And then we also see the fact that, honestly, if everybody reopens and everybody rehires, revenue managers may shift around, but the level of available talent technically has not changed.
Right.
So will the level of demand change, and will employers try to cheap out on these salaries for revenue managers because of the fact that there's a lot of candidates right now?
Yeah, but the problem with that is you run the same risk of going with the cheapest plumber.
Right. Oh, totally. I agree. I think it's a terrible idea.
You're messing with something.
To know,
that's
because honestly, a lot of revenue managers were already being underpaid for the level of strategy that they're expected to deliver.
Yeah,
I think the other thing that might happen, Lily, in your circumstances, are some hotel management companies going to say, "I don't want the in-house burden anymore. Can I use, some third party so that I can ride out the fluctuations easier than having people in-house?" Is the other.
Right.
Works
I mean, honestly, I'm biased towards that idea.
I have twice as many clients now than I had before I went into this process. Not all of them are active. I've lost a few on suspension for right now. But for the most part, I have twice as many clients for this because still somebody needs to know how to screw in the light bulb. They let go of their internal teams. They let go of their large third-party contracts, but they still need things done, and they like the flexibility of, this is all I need, and after you've done that, I'll let you know if there's something else I need, rather than having to sign long commitments, large commitments, perpetual commitments, and it's fitting right now. And for me, it's been, business is great, but as the world changes and turns going forward. Oh, it's on. Have all fun. Have a great weekend. Then they might go back to more standardized relationships as time gets stable again, or something that they might go back.
Well, the big thing with this is that a lot of things have changed, right? And people keep talking about the new normal, but if we look at what has changed, our priorities have certainly changed, and more importantly, our tolerance has changed as well. So I think things that were once off the table or once not a priority are now very attractive options for us. So if you look at the point you just made about revenue managers, and you could say the same for marketing as well, people wanted to have the team in-house. They felt like that was a competitive advantage. But now, if my motivator is cash flow and the ability to cut costs dramatically and quickly, maybe outsourcing that, although it might cost me a little more, at some point in the long term, right now, that might be a cheaper option for me to pay a marketing agency a couple of grand a month versus bringing on someone full time, and I can adjust that more rapidly. So I think because of the changes, we're going to see a different landscape on the other side of this. But my big fear is that because we are going to see folks float out of the industry, and there was already a shortage of talent, we're going to run back into that same shortage again. And it might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be 2 years, I don't know. But at some point, we're going to run back into that same situation. So whereas folks might be underpaid in the short term, I think the good people, the people that are investing in being cross-trained and adding value, are going to be okay in the long term, because the market conditions and the economics of supply and demand are going to favor those that do it really well. But there's going to be winners and losers, like there is any time there's change. So which side do you want to be on, and what are you doing now to make sure you're on the side of the winners, not on the side of the losers? Thinking medium and long term.
Mm-hmm.
All of this kind of brings me back to a question that I've been wanting to ask Stephanie. So conveniently, she's here. I think on our podcast session, Stephanie, a little bit ago, we talked about the checklist for closing a hotel, and now so many things are reopening. And just kind of anecdotally, I was lucky enough this week to be able to just escape overnight to Sedona a little bit and recharge. And as we were looking for places to eat, most restaurants are allowing dine-in, but their Google listing was not updated. So which immediately, of course, made me think of our conversation. So I thought that was interesting. At what point are hotels paying attention to what they should be doing there? Because certainly that should have been the first thing I would think that the restaurants would want to do. And I don't have experience with it happening in hotels just yet. I haven't specifically looked for it, but really kind of caught my attention.
That's the problem, right? Because the person that's responsible for that is probably still furloughed, because the first place people cut was the marketing side, or the person that was responsible for that. So this is where the people that are thinking through long term are going to be a lot more successful and come out way ahead of the folks that are thinking short term.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Google's also been, just in terms of the GMB listing, like they allowed more capabilities in terms of options with restaurants well before they did for hotels, and they were so delayed in allowing that capability, and even now it's still quite the difference. So
there is a very stark contrast between flexibility of the restaurants versus that, and then even to the point of what the enhanced capabilities with brand relationship for Google My Business, they didn't expand it in near as fast as they could have and should have for some of the COVID information and things that they could have updated.
Get me started.
Yeah. It's frustrating because you're sitting there going, you need to let this go. But but by the same token, Google My Business quietly has really blown up as to what it's going to be capable of doing as we come through this, because it seems like with all of our distractions going on, the things that Google is adding to what it's able to be done, the marketing is able to be done, the targeting that's able to be done. It's almost like creating a mirror to its PPC programs, but on a localized scaling capability. So it's going to be interesting to as we emerge out of this, where we spend our money. Is going to be now Google My Business is going to be one of those consideration factors that you have to include into your strategy profile.
Yeah, especially as they roll out the promotions, the Google promotions. Google is smart. The one big winner out of all of this is going to be Google. If you look at what their market share was before and what it's going to be afterwards, I mean, they've taken a big chunk of hospitality revenue over
if
the
only
last
some
week.
agency had waved a red flag back in the day about Google's dominance factor growth. If only somebody had the foresight to see that Google was going to be the big 9,000-pound gorilla on top of the gorilla. I don't know.
And to be fair, it wasn't just us. It was a lot of folks, including Tim was probably the more vocal than us about how Google was scaring the big guys. But, I mean, everything we predicted is happening. And so, I hate to do it, but I'm going to bring up one of the articles that we're meant to be discussing today. But the Expedia CEO came out and laid out their plan for how they're going to tackle Google specifically, because they see it as a challenge. This is not even a Cold War anymore. This is a flat-out war between the OTAs and Google right now. The hotels are innocent bystanders, but we're going to get screwed either way. Someone's going to get in our cookie jar. It's either the OTAs or Google. And it's going to be interesting.
And it is interesting to note, and you brought it up before in earlier conversations, about how all the OTAs are kind of holding back before launching their ad campaigns because they want to make sure the inventory is available for them to sell. And now you have Airbnb doing the same thing, where they're in this latency factor as to when they're going to begin doing their marketing push again. Because they have to wait for certain municipalities and areas to actually open up for inventory to be sold. And then you also deal with they've let go a tremendous amount of their teams and so forth. So they actually have to come back up to speed on some of this stuff anyway. So there is this growth window of opportunity that, should you keep your marketing in place and exercise timeliness, you can capture a tremendous amount of market voice for yourself long before even your localized competitors come into the market.
Why you should be advertising now. And a lot of people keep saying, well, OTAs always benefit from a downturn, which historically has been true. But if you look at what has caused, what the reason for the last downturns was, it didn't affect the OTAs as dramatically. But for 9/11, for example, the OTAs weren't as dominant. Right? They didn't have the revenue stream they needed to protect. They weren't as beholden to Wall Street as they are now. Right now, the OTAs are hurting as much as the hotels. They do not have the war chest to go out and spend their way out of this and advertise like they did after the last downturn. That's how they gained market share, is they advertised more than hotels, and they can't right now. They're actually going to advertise less, and you see Expedia coming out and saying, well, we're actually not going to compete against ourselves anymore. We're not going to be as invested in performance advertising anymore. They see this as an opportunity to get off of that drug that Wall Street's pushed them for growth every year on revenue, and the only way for them to do that was to spend more money with Google. So they're strategically pivoting and saying, we're not going to do that anymore. But at the same time, Google's saying, great, this just accelerates the plan we had all along to disintermediate you guys. So, to me, I think Expedia, booking groups, they're going to come out as a stronger, healthier business in the long term, but their scope and their scale is going to be dramatically reduced, and our reliance as an industry is going to be reduced on them, but it's going to be replaced with Google.
And I'll even throw into the fact, when you think about it in those terms, meta search has been incredibly helpful right now because of the lack of strong cost competition right now. You're able to be well and present in your market if you chase down the right rabbit holes for all this. And even in the large terminologies, even if you're looking for the best downtown hotel, because it is still not as cheap as it was a couple of weeks ago, but it's still cheap to be able to show up for some very high level terms in your market and have that front voice to it. So, part of the strategy that we talk about is that, we do this resending keywords as we try to show up for the highest level of keywords we can until we hit over a threshold of cost of acquisition, and then we pull back. It's like a retreating line. We pull back towards the next level of words that we're able to do, and then the next level until we get back into more standardized marketing, funnel marketing. But be in front of the terms, because as people go through what you're showing in the survey of this discovery, I want to go someplace, they may not be making immediate conversion, but they do have an immediate awareness because you're in the front of the view. So, was there any other numbers, Melissa, that we missed? Because I know you've been just nicely smiling, but I know you have all the information.
My job of just
Stuart's such a hog. He's such a camera hog.
There are two questions that I do want to hit on. One is a new question that we hadn't asked before, and that is about the restaurants. So we wanted to find out, people are traveling, what are they going to do about their food choices? And not surprising, I certainly expected to see a higher propensity to eat outside versus inside, but I think that that's super key for hoteliers to be able to market. If they have an on-site restaurant and they have outdoor seating, they've got to be promoting the heck out of that. And overwhelmingly, people want to buy groceries and eat in their room. So again, those properties that have kitchens in their rooms, they should be promoting the heck out of those right now.
Mm-hmm. That was a restaurant on Monday for the first time. It was awesome. So excited.
I have not been out yet.
That you bring up restaurants. Right now, there's this whole change in that industry as to what a restaurant means right now, because their channels of revenue have dramatically shifted because of the restriction of their internal capabilities of seating. There a lot of relaxation of liquor laws associated between the difference between a restaurant and a bar. Down here in Florida, bars are still not permitted to be open, but restaurants are. And strangely enough, restaurants are adapting their services to be more bar-esque in the sense that they're doing a lot of liquor. As long as there's a piece of food sitting in front of somebody, they can be served liquor. So, and bars are furious because they're losing all this business because they can't reopen. So now they're trying to do more food, but they can only do delivery and pickup because they can't truly open up for seating because they're designated as a bar still. So you have this polarity of that happening. Then you get these third-party companies that are just absolutely raping the revenue off of these companies. Where the states have had to step in, even municipalities, limiting the percentage of commission that they're being paid because it's so steep and so severe. But then you look at the monetization of Uber. Uber's trying to buy Grubhub, and they're not really profit margining. It's like, how can that be? If you're making that much money off of all the sales, how can you not have a profit margin? But they don't. It's still all expense driven for them. So even though they look like they're the big bad guys, which they are, they're also as much of a victim to the process of the costs associated with doing what they're doing. So it's a whole.
I wouldn't call them a victim. I think that's self-inflicted.
No, I don't. I'm not saying, but it's they're not just making piles of cash behind them either, because their margin on their side too is severe. But they're trying to be greedy about that margin. It's not as if they can't run at a lower margin. They want to exercise as much margin as they can, and that's the part where they're evil on, is that they're trying to take too much from those that are providing the service.
It's really. Go ahead.
No, I just said like OTAs do to hotels.
Right. Just like that. Only twice as much on commission. These guys are hitting 30% commission, plus paying all the promotion, plus paying all of the tips and commissions, the tips and everything else. They're literally burdened with every expense associated with that delivery service, except for the actual benefit of revenue.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with a prospect this week, and we were just talking about how prior to this, their reliance on OTAs was in the 75% range, and they were looking at ways to reduce that. And it was interesting because they were talking about, and I think I'm right in that Expedia was the first to say everyone gets their money back, no questions for deposits and things like that, right? And then booking the day after followed it. This particular hotelier's opinion on that was that wasn't their money to get back. They didn't have dialogue with the hotel at all. They just made that decision, and that deposit really was the hotel's money. And so in their case, he said that Expedia stole $5 million from them. And he used the word stole very deliberately because he'd gone to his bank to talk about, financing options and where, and they'd gone through, and this banker wasn't particularly versed on hospitality, but he explained the situation and they asked him to repeat it. And when he'd gone through explaining the entire situation again, the banker looked at him and said, well, they stole your money. That's flat out, they stole your money. You can never do business with them again. And that's the mindset that a lot of hoteliers are having right now is, I don't want to, they didn't treat us like good partners, and Expedia and Booking probably did what they should have done from the consumer perspective, but they certainly didn't do it with being good partners with the hotels in mind when they just arbitrarily said everyone gets their money back, and we're not going to talk to our hotels about that before we make that decision. It's probably what the hotels would have agreed to, but the fact that they didn't include them in that conversation says everything you need to know about what their priorities are. And so there's a lot of hotels looking now and saying, I really shouldn't do any business with the OTAs, but I don't have a choice. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out with that much, animosity towards some of their biggest drivers of demand.
Mm-hmm. Walter in the chat, who joined us over from LinkedIn, by the way, because I ignored his comment earlier because I didn't see it. Sorry. I said, hey, join us on this side. Made an earlier comment that it's going to be a bottom-up restructuring, that they're probably going to invest more in the infrastructure from a bottom-up perspective as we restart the hotels. But he also made another comment to it that he's saying also the Marriott Bonvoy program will be the new norm. Rooms will be deep cleaning before then after the stay, but staff will not clean rooms daily, thus less housekeeping staff. Another example of bottom up. Yes, and that's kind of going to the protocols of and highlighting the safety aspect right now. Is people want to know that stuff. They want to know that their safety, their insecurity of being put at risk is being addressed by who and where I stay, more so than just guessing at it.
Just to add some anecdotal information from my little trip this week, I was speaking with the GM of the Arabella where we were staying, and she said that staffing is a real challenge for them right now. Granted, Sedona is not a market where, people who make a housekeeper level salary probably live. They probably have to drive in a ways. But even that being said, they're having trouble finding staff to handle their level of business because they're honestly selling out every weekend and hitting 50% on the weekdays right now in Sedona, just across the board. But I thought that was really interesting because even though we probably will see some of the bottom-up restructuring that Walter's talking about, there's definitely other hotels that are just struggling to get the staff because, I think it was Lauren who made the point earlier, staff are sort of fleeing to other areas, be it retail or insurance or whatever those cases may be. They're kind of looking for something that they feel is a little bit more stable, which is reducing some of that workforce as well. And maybe part of it also will be the new expectations. You make a housekeeper's salary and all of a sudden there's all this pressure, don't get it wrong or somebody might die. It's, more of like a healthcare level expectation. Will there be sort of an evolution in the way that housekeeping staff operates? Will they now be called sanitation experts instead of housekeepers? There's all these different things I think that go into it. And then on a separate note, I noticed that in the I Will Travel When word cloud, restaurants came up, and I would kind of anticipate that part of that is essentially what I went into it with. I went to Sedona knowing I needed to get away, but figured there'd be pretty much nothing to do. Oh no, that town is alive. There's plenty of restaurants open, there's activities, there's galleries, not all of them, but it was for sure a humming, for a Tuesday, a pretty humming area to be in. And I think that people may be concerned that they're like, okay, well, if I do travel, will there be anything for me to do?
Yeah, and so on the employment side, we had a conversation before you jumped in about similar challenges in other destinations. And to reiterate that point from earlier, I think there's a lot of external pressures on that. Not only are people leaving the industry, not only are people on unemployment and making more money doing so than working right now, but we also have the fact that we're not going to get the students in and the part-time or the seasonal workers that we typically do going into the summer. So, the pool of people is significantly smaller. And what we're seeing is hotels are trying to adjust to that in trying to figure out, well, how can I operate a 400-unit hotel with half the number of housekeepers? And, does that mean that we have to centralize our laundry or outsource our laundry? Does it mean that we no longer offer daily housekeeping? But to your point, Lily, one of the really interesting things throughout this whole pandemic is the economics of it, right? So in any typical scenario, the laws of supply and demand and risk dictate certain things. So typically folks that are in jobs that are, there's fewer workers and there's more need for it. That's a supply and demand issue. Typically, those people will get paid more. People that are in higher risk jobs will typically get paid more, right? So if you look at grocery workers over this time, there's a handful of folks like Whole Foods that have said we'll pay people an extra $1 an hour. But these people are going from $8 or $9 an hour to $9 or $10 an hour. It's not like their money really jumps significantly, but they're being asked to do something which is incredibly risky compared to what it was 6 months ago. But economics didn't step in like it normally would in drive the cost up, which is really interesting. And I think housekeeping's another one where it's going to be the same. We got real big need for it. So the demand for employees is really high, which would typically drive up the wages. Plus, it's become a lot more risky, which would normally drive up the wages. But it's probably not going to happen. This is a real unprecedented situation from an economic standpoint. And I think folks that can adapt to that and understand how to take advantage of that may come out on top. So how can I reduce the need, or how can I train these people in a way that they can make more money or become more valuable to me as a business? And unfortunately, some of that might end up in being passed through as cost to the traveler in terms of resort fees, like we're seeing in places like Vegas. But I think we're going to see a different paradigm on the other side of this than we did going into it related to that.
Honestly, I think if people just increase their resort fees, travelers are just not going to go. I just don't see that working out for them. We need to make more money, so we're going to ask you to spend more money. Just because they need to is not a compelling enough reason for a traveler.
And the restaurants are in the same situation at this point, though. Their food costs are escalating. They had the highest cost increase of food, grocery serviced food, in 30 days than there has been in the past 50 years, in the sense of cost supply value. At the same time that they're at the most narrowed margin profitability that they have, because they have restricted seating, they have limitations, they have cost of service, of delivery service that we just talked about, and so forth. And the only way for them to go is the perfect storm. Hey, guess what? We can only take a quarter of you or half of you that we normally would, and we had to jack the prices up, and our service has gone down. Yay, we're doing good, Yeah.
That's what's going to happen in the hotel and the restaurant industry is prices are going to go up in level. The expectations are going to shift, right? Because we do expect more. Some people are going to be okay with that, but we'll have to find where that new equilibrium is. But I definitely expect people to be charging more because their costs are going up or their volume is going down.
I mean, I can see, even before all this in Seattle, a lot of restaurants had an extra service charge, and they call it a cost of living service charge because they said they couldn't pay their staff proper living wages. So there was very many restaurants had an extra, but you kind of didn't know about it until you got the bill, and you're like, oh, okay. I mean, what are you going to do now? You've already consumed all the food. But I wonder if something like that might end up happening within the hotel space, like an extra
sanitization
fee, but whatever fee.
Well, that brings it, and I'm not going to be as bold as Ed saying to give you suggestions to add to questions, because that's Ed, not me. But just out of curiosity, you make me think of, if an airline approached me and said, would you be willing to pay X amount more if we put you on a plane that had half capacity all the time, or had this extra protocols of cleanliness in place, that we weren't going to put you on an overstuffed plane, or we're going to put you on a well-designated whatever, or a hotel that said, we'll ask you to pay more for a certain level of extra sanitation, like, putting you on a floor that it only has half the capacity. Would you actually pay that fee? I mean, imagine right now, if we ask that question, some people would probably right now say yes, but in a couple of months, they might be less inclined, saying it's not what it is anymore or whatever. But so I don't think it's worthy of asking those kind of questions. But just as a straw poll, I mean, would you right now pay more to have more safety, security when you travel compared to not?
I would have to guess that that's going to be, that's exactly what I was going to say, Mellisa, because millennials and below generally are not concerned about their own health. Yep. Any restrictions that they're complying with are because they're concerned about being a carrier and passing it on to other people that they care about, but the at-risk populations. Even myself, I think I've already had it. Do I want to have it again? I really don't. But it would be more of an inconvenience than something that I was seriously frightened about for my own health and well-being. That being said, I do not want to unwittingly be a carrier to other people. I'm also not going to pay twice as much to sit on a plane. If I'm going out, then that means I'm not as concerned about the risk to other people, right? If I'm on the plane at all. So I think that from the millennial generation, you're going to see a lot more of that. The closer you get to the at-risk population, the more willing I think that they'll be to say, hey, I have no choice. I must travel. Therefore, I'm willing to pay more to have this extra level of distance.
Yep, that's a good point. Very good point.
I'm hearing Tim, Peter in my ear right now, just talking about value, right? People will always be willing to pay for value, and what differentiates a brand is, can you create something that's valuable enough for people to pay for? And what is valuable to different people is different. So you're right, there's going to be some folks that are going to value that extra safety, security, peace of mind, and some that don't. And so what I think is going to happen is you're going to see certain properties take advantage of that and offer certain value to niches of people. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I think the independent hotels are going to come out ahead of the flags. And that sounds counterintuitive because you feel like, oh, people at a Marriott are going to, feel comfortable because they're used to it and they trust the big brand. But I don't think the Marriotts or the Hiltons or the IHGs have it together any more than some of these independent hotels. And in fact, I think because of their ability to be agile, some of these independents are actually doing a better job catering to the specific needs of their specific clients. So I think if you're someone that is willing to do the work and figure out what is the value that my specific demographic is looking for, and are they willing to pay for it because it's that much of a differentiator, I think you can come out of this very, very well. I mean, I personally, to answer your straw poll, I would pay more. Now, is it 50% more? Probably not. But would I pay an extra $10 or $20 a night to have increased peace of mind, knowing that my family is safer? Absolutely, I would. So I think finding the thresholds and finding those levers that are going to motivate people, I think it's an opportunity, but also a risk, because we could go too far and end up in the, where everything's unbundled and we end up like the airlines, which I don't think is good for anyone, certainly not the industry as a whole.
Well, I think it's a lot like when Obamacare first came out, right? And all of a sudden restaurants started tacking on an Obamacare fee to your restaurant bill. I don't know if you guys ever experienced that, but there were a lot of restaurants who did that to cover the additional cost that they felt there was to them related with the new Obamacare guidelines. So I think we might see something similar. Perhaps people, hoteliers will see this as their opportunity to get away from, oh, I'm not going to charge a resort fee, but I am going to charge a sanitation fee, and basically just rename a fee that they've always had to a more PC term, so that they can continue to get away with it.
Well, I mean, I think also to add to this is an interesting juxtaposition for brand to take advantage of what brand value can bring, where independent hotel cannot. To your point, Stuart, I completely agree with you. Independent hotels have a greater flexibility to convey their communication because they have literally unlimited channel variations to do so. There's no limitation to their capability to communicate. It's only their limitation of what they're willing to communicate about. Where brands, I've always been constrained as to what they've been allowed to communicate with. That being said, if brand could expand what their messaging is, or allowable messaging from the properties, to allow the properties to have their own representation as to what they're doing and reaffirming for cleanliness and so forth, then it may give them that chance to have, right now in this window of opportunity, for people who are traveling, like I mentioned earlier, trying to get back home, they want to go to a good brand that is taking good care of them in a cleaning way. And if the brand can allow the hotel to communicate that more effectively rather than restrictively, because right now the hotels, if they even have a social platform built, that's about their only lateral move to be able to communicate with. Very little can actually be done on the side, the mothership for them right now. They're not really able to do more than what the brand is allowing them for brand standard projections to go forward. But I do have another.
If only we had a brand expert on this panel right now.
I know, right?
Exclusively with brands.
I have a question for her, though. Since she has the housekeeping crew, which we're seeing in the background, what's the cleanliness policy going on with that? Because I mean, obviously, you have a team here.
He will sit outside of that door and lay on the floor and listen until he hears me get off the phone or a call. He just lays there. But no, the brands, like for Hilton and Marriott, you can't even change your alerts because they have their standard. They don't want any hotels to mess up their verbiage. You can't even like change your alert to say your pool's closed or anything like that. It's same exact.
Yeah. So it's even more restrictive than normal, right? So to Lauren's point, where they need to really loosen it up and then let the individuals communicate based on their specific situation, it's actually the opposite right now. So
yeah, I think they're just afraid of different liability or people saying something that they probably shouldn't say. But outside of social media, and then for the group hotels, communicating with your group planners and things like that, it is fairly limited. And then my other frustration that I'm running to now, I have hotels that have redone all their capacity charts, from a social distancing standpoint, like on all the third-party sites, whether it be, CVN or whatever. Like you don't want to like change your normal capacities because who knows how far out somebody's planning for. So how you need two ways to communicate like your temporary sets and capacities versus what your full sets and capacities are without does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm struggling with the branded systems too. Like you only can say this room sets this or this. So anyways.
And it changes. I think right now the allowances are even changing. What percentage capacities of the capabilities? That really, it's almost the only measuring stick you can have, because we've had this discussion just recently. Is how many people can you keep 6 foot apart? Is what it really almost boils down to. It's not about whether you have a capacity limit. That's your top end. If the room capacity by fire law is 100 people, it's not just half of that or 25% of that. It's like, how can you effectively keep the distance requirement for the people that would be participating? And that changes the number itself. So, and yeah, you're right. The brands don't have any aspect of that. I mean, we're already putting it on the websites. This is our COVID capacity. That's literally what we call it. It's our COVID capacity versus our fire capacity. So,
yeah, I think Marriott just this week came out with their provisional guidelines on some of that, and the others have not yet. But it's interesting because everyone tackled transient first and just the regular leisure traveler. So there's a lot of good resources out there for guidelines on protocols and SOPs and stuff like that. But on the group side, there's not yet. No one really has tackled that and done it in an effective way. I think Marriott is the first to push out anything, but I would anticipate that that's going to be a hot topic over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Is how do we answer the questions that Stephanie's asking? How do we decide what our capacity really is and what the protocols are, and how do we make people comfortable that they can come back and have meetings and groups in our property?
The meeting planners are asking now, especially for the ones in those pharma, medical, anything like that, who they need to be having some. There are RFPs out there for those type, and they're just not getting. I have one hotel that has their capacity charts completely redone, and they're getting such feedback, and they're like, this is the first time we've even seen diagrams, but it's just so many of the teams are shrunken from a sales standpoint. They just don't have the capacity because a lot of times the sales managers work in the front desk or night audit or
Right. And that's an opportunity, I think, because I've heard a lot of folks that are trying to plan, I work with a lot of associations, things like that, and they've all had to change their plans, and they're re-looking at locations and dates and, into 2021 and 2022, but they're complaining because they're saying we can't get information. Either there's not staff there to respond, or the staff that is there doesn't have the information to provide to us yet. So I think we as an industry are moving too slow on that front. I think we really need to start beefing up stuff and really think through the protocols and the SOPs there, because there's a lot of demand. You think about every association in the world, right? Every single one of them, a large chunk of their revenue comes from conferences and group meetings. And every single one of them is freaking out for the same reason the hotels are, that they need to stay solvent. They need to be able to stay afloat. And so they've got to understand when their next group meeting is. And they're trying right now to reschedule, and then just getting stonewalled. They're getting people saying, we can't help you right now. It's a lost opportunity.
I was going to say, CVent needs to step it up. I've been talking with them, and I'm like, how can we communicate that we, have these new processes and procedures in place? How do we communicate, 2 different, options depending on when a group's trying to book? And they're like, oh, here, you can spend some marketing dollars. And I was like, No, like you have to make platform changes and get with it. Like
functionalities,
ask me to spend a bunch more money right now. Like that's not going to fly.
Right. Yeah. Well, and like what Walter's pointing out on the other side, and I'll point out to this too, is like brand markets brand. They don't market the A hotel, the B hotel, the C hotel. They market what the brand is. And so even though they may have more monies to spend about what they're doing as brand initiatives, it doesn't address to what you're saying, Stephanie, is the property's issue of identification of information, the ability for the property to, I mean, the only way you're going to find out from a property what its capacities or functionalities or even serviceabilities are at this point. Are they back online, not back online? What are they taking for business? What they're not taking for business? You know, what their limitations are is literally you have to reach out and do the old call up and find out if somebody answers the phone because they don't have the ability to put it on their website. Yeah, and hope that somebody even answers it. I mean, that's even the scarier part is that, you know, because you don't even have the ability to or they don't update their GMBs or anything like that. You don't even know if they are open, which creates a whole uncertainty of travel on its own. Because some websites, I mean, literally some hotels shuttered up and they didn't even update their websites. So you book. I have one hotel that is in New York that we compete against that is still taking bookings, even I know for a fact it's closed. And it's like, how much frustration is that? You know, somebody shows up and the door's locked. Wow. Anyways, Tamara's, I totally forgot. I need to see that. Yeah.
I was going to ask if Mellisa had any. I think Mellisa had one other thing she wanted to point out on the report.
I may have.
Oh,
yeah. That. So we added a new thing. We added on the question asking about destination types and when people would be willing to travel to specific destination types. We added 2 new categories. One was cruise, which we just added because I felt like it needed to be there just to validate what I already knew was going to be. But we also added all-inclusive resorts. And honestly, I was a little surprised at how little interest anybody has of going there anytime soon.
Well, they are all buffets.
Yeah,
for sure. Which I think actually Ariel was asking about in the chat of the how do you redo your catering budgets with the fact that you can't.
And a lot of those would be abroad too. You know, a lot of people when they're thinking about that, they're thinking about Mexico and stuff like that, Caribbean. So I think that could be a factor as well.
Yeah. But like Ariel was pointing on the chat to it too, as well. It's like, wait a minute, even your breakouts. How do you handle breakouts now? You know, you can't just everybody having tapping off the same coffee dispenser. You can't have everybody grabbing the same sugar containers. You can't have, I also get kicked out when they show restaurants and stuff where they're showing what they're doing for cleaning, but on the table you still see the salt and pepper and hot sauce. It's kind of like, maybe you might want to package that up into small little packs. Or they're scratching their face while they keep talking about not touching their face. I love the news reporters that do that. But but the idea of our whole method of food and beverage distribution, I know that some of the breakfasts, the previous buffets are now boxed. I know from our independent side, people are calling down for their lunch, for their breakfasts to be made, and we box them. And then when we tell them when they're ready to be, they're available, and they'll come down, and their name's literally on the box, or their room number or whatever, so that they get what they're asking for, but it's not in a buffet form anymore. I mean, we just can't. So it does change the scope of that by far, and density of how many people can you service at one time? How many people per half hour can you run?
Density and traffic flow as well. You got to really consider that. So. Yeah, it's tough, right? It's very complicated, and we're dealing with so much uncertainty that no one really knows. And a lot of times, there's not a good solution, or there's not a right answer. You're picking between a bad option and a worse option. So, I think the one thing I would say is a lot of people put a lot of effort into, at the state levels, the local levels, the brand levels. A lot of people put a lot of effort into what are our SOPs just in general. For operating a hotel. And I feel like there's a lot of information. If you look at Marriott's version versus Hilton's version, there's not that many differences, right? Everyone's kind of come to this happy ground of this is kind of what we can do, and it's not perfect, but it's good, right? So, people wearing face masks, the staff, and having plexiglass and things like that, limiting spacing and at the check-in desk, things like that, cleaning protocols. I don't think anyone's really put the energy and the effort that's needed to really figure out the group side. Even at the flag level, and I've spoken to folks from Hyatt and Wyndham and others that they're still scratching their head. But it's something that we need to figure out quickly. We need We need to get people together in a room or virtually in a room to hash this out. And I really think if you put enough smart people in a room for 3 or 4 days, you can come up with a pretty good framework. Now, it's not going to be perfect and it's going to have to evolve, but people need to do that now. Every major brand needs to be pushing that out. If they have an independent properties too around that rely heavily on this, they should be doing the same. So I think that's really the next big thing. What's that?
All of most of the brand corporate teams are still on furlough and don't have dates to come back.
Yeah. Well, we
so,
know.
So they should take the head of that department from every one of the major brands and collaborate. Because this is something that we could end up hurting the industry more than it's already hurting if we don't get that figured out quickly.
There's some management companies out there that are putting together some strong stuff that are doing a really good job.
I think I was talking to Ed a couple of days ago. There's two aspects to this. One is the people that were left behind are overburdened and burned out. They were given other people's jobs, responsibilities because they were the lucky survivor. How lucky was that? Now they're working 20 hours a day and doing 5 jobs and probably at half pay. So they're already on the burn. They're already crispy. They're tired. They're overwhelmed. There's nothing they can accomplish. They're just worried about knocking stuff off their plate. Then you have whole teams, professional teams, quality teams. They're literally setting idle off on the side that if you trigger one and find out that they're connected to 5 others, you can bring in a kick-ass, excuse the French, team of something, sales, marketing, revenue management, whatever. In a flip of a switch, you can bring in very happy to be back people all at once that could really move the needle if you just want to take in the fact that you need to start turning on the furnaces right now.
Wow, Lauren, did you just say get rid of all the people you kept and bring back the people you got rid of?
They need help is what I'm pointing out. I'm saying they need help. They need the cavalry over the hill. They need some,
reinforcements. Yeah, they need reinforcements for sure.
But the same token, going back to what Stephanie's saying, you need to bring in that infrastructure again to do these things. Nobody's answering the phone calls. Was it who was on the show? Stuart, you were with us when they were talking about the sales growth that people were getting massive amounts of sales calls, bookings for the 3rd and 4th quarter because they simply kept their sales team intact. Mm-hmm. The resurgence of that interest, the rebookings and so forth and so on. But, again, it goes to doing that now and doing the marketing now and reaching out to the audiences now where everybody else is waiting for the final sign. By that point, the wave's already passed. You're just paddling to catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every day you wait at this point to bring back your sales stuff, to bring back your marketing stuff, to start investing in advertising again. Every day you wait, it's going to take you longer to recover. The sooner you do that stuff, and everyone's in a different situation, but there are creative ways to figure out. There are other ways to cut, and there are other ways to borrow. You've got to get that engine turning right now because it's not flipping a switch. You can't just expect to be full necessarily the next day. In some markets you will, but a lot you won't. So you've got to really begin that process now because the recovery is beginning, and it's beginning in spots in different areas. But it's going to be here quicker than you think, And we might see a resurgence, but there's a good chance we won't, at least through the summer. So you've got to be advertising now. You've got to have teams back at close to capacity. And the reason you need to do that is because a lot of your competition won't. And if you want to steal market share, this is the time to steal market share. You could toil for years and years to gain 1% market share, whereas you could do the same thing in a month right now because your competition isn't active and you can be active.
Totally the truth for that. Now, there's a little bit of dialogue going on with Tamara and Ariel about the food aspect of it. It's funny that, what's old is new again. I don't know if people remember back in the day, there used to be a cafeteria place called Morrison's. And that was, the service was buffet where you're looking at the food, but they're plating it for you and giving it to you for you to continue forward with. And they would actually bring it out to you and so forth and so on. It's kind of an old Southern, I think it was more in the South.
I was just going to say, it sounds like a school cafeteria.
Style. It's really what it was. It was cafeteria style. Look at the Golden Corrals and all these. I mean, there's some businesses that are not going to come back in any form they are right now, like Sweet Tomatoes and so forth. They closed 97 restaurants permanently. They're out of business until they figure out how to retool this. How do we do proper food service where people feel safe in the food that they're getting from us? Because that's really what it's boiling down to. They're talking about buffet attendance and handing coffee out, all these different things. We are actually kind of in some ways bring back some hospitality to it. I think also room service is a whole new relook. I mean, real room service, not and not where they're willing to cart in, but room service where the food is brought to you and let you know that it's outside your door, and then you can bring it in for yourself after that point. But rather than having them all come down to a congregated area where people, you amp up room service as being a viable service tool in the hotel. That everybody can get breakfast. Literally, you can deliver breakfast to everybody, but you got to be staffed to be able to do that, and have the safety protocols in place to make sure people feel comfortable with they're getting delivered. So,
and it was getting dropped by a lot of full service hotels and brands as a. It was getting dropped fast. So we'll see what happens with that.
Mm-hmm. And even if you don't have it to scale internally, you can reach out to the local restaurants again and see if there's a collaboration capability. Have them bring the food in for the service profiles that you want, the meal periods that you want. And even if you don't have the scalability internally to do it in your own, even bring them in for your buffet banquet services, not buffet, but banquet services, where you can bring in food types that are all packaged. Literally, it's like delivery. Here's everything on the back table for everybody to grab their own meal program from. So there's a solution.
Those local collaborations, I think, have been really successful for a lot of folks.
Walter's asking maybe about automats come back. Yeah. Hey, who knows? Maybe automats will come back. For those who don't know, it's with little doors that open up and the food's behind it.
So just to open up a quick can of worms that we'll probably have to get into on our next show, I'll be curious to know how travel might be affected by the idea that more people will be homeschooling this fall after the CDC released their restrictions on schools and what has to be done for schools to open in the fall, including installing plexiglass between all the desks. Children are not allowed to sit at lunch together, et cetera, et cetera.
They were only suggested. They're not.
True, but there is a lot of social media backlash right now about people who are making plans to start homeschooling in the fall because
that is the last thing I'm planning to do right now.
Why is that? Well, okay. Honestly, I'm right now currently running campaigns called Recover Your Summer Vacation, which are targeted for September, October, because I'm banking on the fact that with mom and dad still being able to work at home and little junior being able to take school at home, even partially, they're going to go to hotels and go have a half vacation somewhere where in the morning time they take care of the school stuff and the work stuff, and then they're out to the pool or they're going to do something. I think that because they get deprived of their summer vacation potentially and also to their spring break, I think there's going to be a whole lot of let's get the family out of the house before we go crazy, which we already are. And go off and do stuff. And it's a lot of traffic. I mean, it's hard to say bookings because everything's so loose. I can't enforce any bookings with pre-purchase or anything right now. I mean, no matter what price model I put together, and it's not a low price. It's just everything has to be cancelable anyway because nobody's going to take non-refundable. So, but it's getting a lot of traffic, and it's So,
and I think that's whenever there's something going on like this, there's always an opportunity. And I think the opportunity here is yes. There will probably be more people homeschooling. And in addition to that, there will also be more people that are working remotely permanently. You've got every day there's new companies coming out. Like Facebook came out and said 95% of their staff are working remotely right now. And Mark Zuckerberg said that he predicts that 25% of his staff will be working remotely permanently. And you've got other companies saying we're going to let anyone that wants to work remotely work. So I think those two things coupled together mean that the typical dates and where your shoulders are in a specific market that depends on school travel or out of school travel, I think you're going to see that these shoulders are going to broaden a little bit, and you're going to have an opportunity to drive demand and claim a higher rate for dates that you typically couldn't.
Yeah. So
this is another reason why you can't rely on your old marketing playbooks and your old rate management and optimization playbooks. This is the new era that we're heading into is so unknown, and what worked yesterday is not going to work tomorrow. And there's a lot of opportunity to be had in that, in terms of trying to gain market share and trying to gain profitability in areas that and times that you couldn't traditionally. So you got to be paying attention because it's going to be changing.
Well, like you just pointed out, Stuart, is that everybody that comes come back thinking they're just going to turn the light switch back on to the things that were, the targets moved. They're aiming in the wrong direction now. They're not targeting the right people for the right reasons with the right message. Nothing. And we even notice it now, the hypersensitivity to any businesses that are tone deaf in their messaging. if you're not sympathetic to or empathetic to the current situation and try to ignore it, you're immediately considered tone deaf because you are. You're not listening to what is the concern of people right now, like what your survey's shown out, the safety issues and the propensity for travel, what they would be first interested in traveling in. And I know, Mellisa, we did not hit on near all the data that the information had. And that's because we talked about
the website, you can see all of it.
It is. And then the link, I think very early on, it was put in. Actually, if you could you drop it back into the chat again to the actual link again, so that those who joined us after we had first shared it can go to it more directly and look at all the data and detail that is in there, because it's the fourth of there's three earlier ones. So you get to see the whole wave.
You get to see the shift for sure. I do want to point out before we go that Ed was wrong, and I love to say that sentence, and I wish he was here to hear it. But he gave us a lot of last week, because we were talking about one of the questions, and it was a fair point that he made, which was the question about how do you intend to spend your stimulus money was very one-sided. There was a lot of fiscally responsible responses, like putting into savings, paying for essential items like food and household products. So there was a lot of good things to do with the money, and there was a lot of potentially irresponsible or frivolous things to do given the current conditions. And the only one of that was, at the time, was take a vacation. So his argument was vacation was where it was because we didn't give enough balance in the question. So this time we asked a handful of others. So we asked things like, or added options like purchase a vehicle, purchase non-essential products such as electronics or jewelry. So we added a handful of those to balance it out. It didn't meaningfully change where vacation was. It was still fluctuating around the 10% mark. It didn't materially move. None of the other ones that we added had more than 1% of the responses, with the exception of home improvements, which you could argue is probably not, your response was probably a good investment. So that one came in a little bit above vacation, but vacation didn't move materially. So his hypothesis, his criticism was wrong, but his hypothesis his criticism was right. His hypothesis was wrong.
Well, to add to your point, I think people are seeing travel as an essential component of life right now. It's not a matter of a voluntary to what he's trying to point out. And I remember the conversation where he was trying to point out as being a frivolous aspect, that it was in comparison to what else you didn't compare it to choose from. But I think people have redefined what they consider to be essential to their well-being. Yeah. And travel has entered, and not as it ever had been out of it, but more so now than ever, it is considered an essential aspect of sanity and happiness and what we do and should be doing as a person and so forth. So, yes. And by the way, lots of compliments on especially on LinkedIn and so forth, which for some reason my chat, I can watch them and talk to them, but I can't see them when they comment unless I comment back. So I missed I think I included everyone. Some of them came over, Tamara came over from it and so forth, but we had a lot of dialogue on LinkedIn that wasn't seeing any of my comments, and I didn't see theirs early. So I apologize for the latency in getting back with everyone that was talking to us on LinkedIn for that. We are at over the 2-hour mark. I think Melissa's been standing for 2 hours.
I stand all day. It's fine.
Yeah.
And it is a credit to you all that the sentiment survey has been fundamental to a lot of my discussions with my clients, and I can't thank you enough for having the validity of the data to show that my ideas aren't crazy, which usually they are without data. But if we could, Stephanie, if people want to know more about what you do and where to find you, where is it they can do that?
Find me at cogwheelmarketing.com or on LinkedIn. And I just I'll see if I have some stories next week. Next Friday, I won't be here because we are making the snowbird trek from Florida to Massachusetts and then flying back to Seattle. So I'm sure something is going to go wrong between the flight / massive drive.
You'll have the travel story. By the way, I also enjoyed your piece on LinkedIn. The post you did with it, all the information and everything else. I thought you gave a lot of great information on that post you put out for it. When I first hit it, I was the one that made the comment says, I got a 521 error, but it got fixed. Because it really was good data, really, really good stuff. So thank you for posting that up.
Damn server errors.
Ms. Mockerman, I am going to be posting your podcast today. Thank you. I
Yay.
to it sooner, but it'll go live today, which was I listened to part of it. I will listen to all of it today, and it sounded awesome as always. But if people want to know more about you, your podcast, TCRM services, Thinks Up Enterprises, where is it they can find you?
They can find us at tcrmservices.com or thinkupenterprises.com, which is where the podcast lives as well. And you can also, of course, reach out to me on LinkedIn at any time or my email, lily@tcrmservices.com.
Excellent. And Mellisa, I know that you have the award-winning podcast. You are the brains behind the efforts. The quality is there because of you, not because of Mr. Eye Candy next to you. But if they would like to know more about you, the podcast, Fuel Travel, where does it end your survey? Where is it they can find you?
We are at fueltravel.com. You can find the survey at /blog. You can find the podcast at /podcast because we try to be common sense people. And you can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter at MA Kavanagh.
Mr. Stuart Butler, sir, not that you have anything more to say about what Melissa's already said, but is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I mean, fueltravel.com is the mothership. You can find me on LinkedIn on Stuart Butler. I do want to apologize to Lily. We were supposed to be recording this afternoon, but I had to cancel on her. I think we've got crazy schedules that we're trying to line up. But right now, our life is inundated with requests for demos for our mobile app product. The whole world focused on safety is really looking for this contactless experience on the hotel, and so we are drowning in demand for our mobile app right now, which is a great problem to have. But apologies to Lily for that. So we'll reschedule that for next week.
Hey, real quick, can you throw a link up real fast if people want to know more about the mobile app interface?
Yeah, just go to fueltravel.com. It's right there. Click on software.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I'm like with you. I tell people, like, go look, see, because people are, like I said, already asking how can they convert over, what are the options they have out there, what are the stable options they have out there. So yeah, it's congratulations for having the foresight to have that built already. So that
yeah, well, it's a little lucky. We've had the product for about 3 years now and focused on check-in. You know, about 6 months ago, we got our asset alloy certification with the keyless entry, but we've been spending the last 2 months really beefing up PMS and lock integration so that we can have a broader exposure there. But yeah, it's a product in mass demand. If you don't want customers coming to the front desk or you want to avoid contact with the customers and staff, there's a lot of products out there that do that, but as seems to be very popular right now, which is very fortunate.
No, and for those that were earlier on the show that saw Ed departure, Ed is with Flip2. He's the president of Flip2. The two gentlemen from Britain, where unlike Stuart, who's from South Africa.
There's so many of our listeners who have no clue where Stuart is actually from.
My own family doesn't know where I'm from when they hear me speak anymore.
He's got the Southern British combo thing going on, but Ben and Tris both are starting up their own agency. I don't know specifically what that agency is going to be doing yet, but it's going to be something interesting, I'm sure. But we'll keep it. They're always going on the show weekly basis and so forth. So we ran out of time for Tim Peter today since he's taking vacation. Somewhere, I think where he's going. But anyways, thank you all for your time today. Thank you everyone that was on the different alternate platforms watching and listening to us today. As always, every week, you can find this and all the previous shows at hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com/live. Fridays, 11:30 Eastern, as we do the live show. We also have a backup podcast to this. Lily has her podcast. Holly has her podcast. Fuel Travel has the best award-winning podcast. But thank you, everyone, for your time today, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week at 11:30. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Yeah.